differ in our interpretation, in the meaning of the sacred text.
Today we're talking with John Kissick, Guelph-based painter, writer, and teacher. I've been aware of John's work for at least 15, 16 years. When I was shifting from figurative to abstract work, he was one of 3 artists that I really kind of absorbed his work. I don't know, Mark, if you were with me. I saw your work at the Leo Kamen Gallery. Is that right? Were you showing with Leo at 80 Spadina? Yep. Yeah, so I've seen some of the work in person there.
Yeah, I had a kind of an interesting, unlike a lot of artists where you're with a gallery that maybe for a couple of years and then either it closes or it's like something happens or the work doesn't move or anything like that. I was with Leo Gaiman for the early, very early 90s, like 92. And then after he sold the gallery to Marion Katzman, it became Katzman. And then it became Katzman Contemporary, and she moved it onto Miller Street. And then, so it basically, I was with the same gallery for almost 20 years,
That's awesome.
Which is unbelievably rare. And I feel pretty lucky about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that space at 80 Spadina, at least for a time, was like such a mecca. You know, that was, back in the day where you'd go to Yorkville for a bit of a stint and then down to 80 Spadina and able to see at least 10 like top-notch galleries. Yeah,
that's right.
Kind of miss those days in Toronto.
Yeah, no kidding.
I don't know. And I think it may have shifted to Lansdowne and Bloor area, but that's the other side of the world for me. So
yeah, and it's spread out more.
Yeah.
No.
Oh yeah, I think that's also the Toronto real estate market right now, right?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, it's
diffuse.
Yeah. So one of the questions we've been asking people over the last year is how the pandemic is affecting you both, kind of like personally, how you're working. I mean, I guess one question is, have you been teaching during the pandemic? And secondly, how's it impacted your art practice?
Yeah, so I've been actually fortunate that I've been on research leave for sabbatical. So I've been actually, it's kind of combined with the pandemic to make a bit of a monk. You know, I have, like most people right now, I travel from home to the studio and go back. And that's the extent of my world, like most artists right now. And as you probably noticed, I'm lucky enough to have a studio space which is reasonably expansive, and I can work on a lot of things at one time. So I'm never bored in the studio, and that's been great. And then just the distraction of having the brewery here as well.
Yeah.
It sounds like really the ideal workspace.
Really?
I realize that any artists watching this are going to be really envious right now.
Do they have a restaurant as well?
They do, yes.
Oh my God, you're in heaven, right? I don't know if you drink beer, but it'd be terrible if you don't drink beer.
It's what a sad life, making art and drinking beer, right?
And eating probably pub food, right? So I don't know.
Yeah,
sounds good to me. And you're down in a very lovely area, Cambridge.
Sure. I think it's in many ways feel very, very fortunate. And but the other thing that's been interesting about the pandemic has been the kind of lack of face-to-face interactions with artist friends that I would rely on, and instead a kind of almost reinforcing of the kind of social media platforms that artists are using right now. And that's probably a good and a bad thing. I'm not, I haven't really got my head around it that much, but I'm spending a lot more time looking at friends' work on Instagram.
Well, I've noticed there was a gap in your social media presence and seeing more of that now. And I'm definitely seeing a lot more art online. A lot of people who, probably like you, just more like, you like to meet people in person and chat, and didn't really need social media maybe. And I know
Correct.
a few people who much more present, which is interesting because it is allowing us to see works in process, in progress. A lot of people are posting and getting comments, and
That's right.
and Mark and I have been doing this for a year and a half, and originally we would do it once a month because we went to a gallery or studio, and once it became online, it's like for a while it was every week.
Yeah.
And so we've met a lot of amazing artists from around the world, Britain, Mexico City, a lot of people in the US, and it's in some ways it's exciting because we're meeting all these new people.
Yeah, we're meeting people that we would not have ordinarily met, and if we didn't
Right.
have these mechanisms like Zoom and the internet and such to do that, it would be a very different product. Let's just say.
Sure, and I think you see that. You see that as well, even with the galleries and that now, where they. I had a show last June in Toronto at Gallery House with Belinda Chun, but the funny thing about that was that it was planned. We decided to go forward with it, but because of COVID restrictions, you could only have 2 or 3 people in the gallery at one time, and so even the traditional social aspect of the opening was totally shot to hell.
Yeah.
So it's fun that a lot of galleries are now just deciding that they're going to do their exhibition online, like virtual.
Right.
Right. Which is a little different as well.
And it took them a while to get there, hasn't it? Because you would have thought that they could have switched a couple months into the pandemic, like everybody else on the planet. But it's almost 8 months, a year into the pandemic, and they're realizing we really should do virtual exhibits.
Well, I think everybody was waiting, right? Everybody was hopeful.
Waiting and hoping, yeah. But I mean, the big museums had virtual platforms right early on. I mean, you could do the virtual tours of the Met or museums in London and Rome and so forth. But the galleries took a little longer. But do you not think that, I mean, I know that I'm feeling this for myself personally, when this thing is over, and over enough, enough people have been vaccinated and it's safe to go out again, do you feel like there's going to just be a tidal wave of visits to galleries, museums, exhibits, as well as real live exhibits? Breweries. I mean, I know that there's lots of talk about the Roaring '20s and partying and so forth, and maybe bringing back rave culture and such. But just for the art world, do you feel that's percolating?
I would like to hope so. I think people are desperate to get out and actually, look at real art in person, the way it's supposed to be done, and in a specific context. But I also worry about a new kind of reliance from the visual arts on social media. The idea that the actual being present with a work of art is now being kind of thrown aside for instead a kind of almost a shopping model of the way one scrolls through social media to look at work. And I think that one could go either direction, I think, with this. I mean, I'd like to think, I know myself, I'm dying to get out and look at work. And but I've been reminded that I am not necessarily of the generation that relies on social media quite as much as younger artists, and I'm curious what the longer term impact of that's going to be on how we, especially with painting, which is something that is always at the best of times a poor approximation when it's posted online. And
prior to social media, I know most art through books or magazines, and it's the same thing. And I have a few significant experiences, especially seeing people like Agnes Martin. In a book, Agnes Martin doesn't really do anything for me, but I went to a show in New York, and there was a basket in one room, and Agnes Martin down the hall, and it was like, you go to the basket, it's like his work is translate well into graphics, and it's like, okay. But then I went to and it was like being in a Zen temple. It was like the physical energy that was emitted from the painting was like the best word was transcendental. It was like this incredible experience, and it was like, oh my God, this is what it means to be in a space and really feel the essence of the artist. And I think the one other time I felt that was with the Picasso show, where you could feel his personality in the brush strokes, and it was like he's in the room, like you could really feel it, because it was like quite a large survey show. And
it's that sense of being immersed, right? It's the sense of presence, but also just being completely immersed and surrounded. I mean, that's what a good installation will help you feel. I mean, I think we if we're going to do this virtually, they've got to start doing it where we've got to improve
tactile. You could have like 3D
or the holodeck or whatever, that kind of technology, so that we can really feel like we're present with a work. And I would say, John, with your works, I mean, the size is a really important aspect of your work, I think. And seeing your work online, I mean, they're gorgeous, of course, but I'm sure the impression would be, I think, so much greater to be able to see these enormous abstract pieces in person. And I mean, we got a taste of that when we saw your studio tour just a few minutes ago, right? But to see these large canvases with so much going on in them, I think that's the sense of immersion that I'm talking about, and that's where I feel like we really need that to experience that live.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been told that my paintings hate photographers, or they also they don't play well with, they don't play with other children either. That's the line, that they tend to be boisterous, and but they also don't read very well, partially because my process is additive and cumulative, and so that the surfaces themselves tend to be in some areas very flat, and other areas very encrusted. And I made a decision many years ago, and when I changed the sort of paint chemistry I was working with, that I wanted to create something that a viewer would actually be able to see the kind of my thought process, and that is totally lost in basically anything that's digital. And I think it's a huge part of the work, a way to understand the work, and I think it rewards a viewer who's willing to get up to them. So
Absolutely.
I trained almost exclusively in oils, and for a while I was throwing other stuff into it, like Dorland's wax medium and all kinds of other
experimenting with different.
Sure. And then but when I started the kind of right around 2000, 2001, when I started what I now consider to be like my trajectory, I was really looking at a certain period in time and a certain kind of application of paint. So I went back to acrylics for the first time in years, and part because I was trying to mimic a bit of that 70s kind of plastic look. And I found that it enabled me to fairly quickly do a lot of interesting underpainting. And then I would do oil on top of it. But I found that in order to get that kind of layering approach, and for these things to look a little more wall-like, I needed to do something to the oil paint. I wanted it to be a little more slick and lay a little flatter. So I added alkyd resin to the paint, and it did a couple things. One is it really sped up the drying time from days to basically 24 hours. And so I was able to, given the fact that like a lot of these paints take months already to do, if I had to deal with the drying time of the oil paint as it would be more like a year. So
or a Howard Hodgkins painting.
Exactly.
7 years, 10 years.
Yeah, multiple years. Exactly. And then the final part was I didn't realize at the time, but that once you put the alkyd resin into the oil paint, it almost plasticizes it.
Right.
And so that I was able to then go back with acrylic paint on top of the essentially enamelized oil paint, and it would adhere, and it was archival as well. Archival as it is right now, like I've been, nothing's happened.
We'll check again in 50 years.
Exactly. Archival, like I'm archival, right? Like, you know, there'll be something left of me somewhere. But it also enabled me to make the kind of marks that I couldn't do before, because one of the things that's characteristic of my work is it's some very kind of quick and sort of gestural, almost like sort of expressionist mark making with those kinds of dot configurations and quite graphic things on top. And you can't actually do that very well with oil on oil, and especially not those dots. So that's why they look different. I'm cheating.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question about your process. Just it's more of a from the subjective side of it. As you said, you were working in layers. You're painting segments. You're painting over segments. You're covering things up, which is a marvelous process, and I adore that kind of thing. It's very collage-like in many ways. But in doing that, you are going to be obscuring something that you've already created. Does that ever bother you? Do you ever feel like, oh God, why did I just cover up this part? Why did I just remove that from view? Or or do you,
maybe I yeah, I mean, it happens every day. It happens, like there's always this kind of I think that my process is more of what I would call an ongoing sort of negotiation with the things that I'm doing. And so I think my process is also risk, basically involved in areas of risk, where you will tear something down or obscure something in the hopes that what you're going to get or what's going to happen as a result is going to be better. And if it's not, then you just keep going, and it keeps piling up until you hit a sort of equilibrium. The actual process that I've been engaged in or with for the last I don't know how many years, I think the best analogy I have to this, and it was a very big influence on me, was I worked in Belfast in Northern Ireland in the 90s. About a couple months, 2-3 months a year over the course of almost a decade. So I was there during the kind of the last years of the Troubles. But my project when I was there was I was documenting, I was taking photographs of the paramilitary murals that the different like paramilitaries of terrorist organizations would paint on the sides of the gables. You've probably seen them before, these pictures of guys with balaclavas and Kalashnikovs. But what I found really interesting as a painter was that these walls were part of a kind of larger political and cultural theater between the communities. And so a community might hire an artist, or maybe just the amateurs themselves would go and paint something on, and the other community would tend to enjoy the mural, and they would do things like what were called paint bombs, and they'd pour pink paint into Coke bottles and hurl them at the walls, and they'd obliterate the painting. And then the next day somebody would try and clean it up, and some of the paint would stick, and they'd paint over top of that. And then somebody would firebomb it, and so half the paint would melt, and then the iconography would be repainted on top of it. And so they became documents of an actual kind of political theater between the different communities, and the kind of the sheer physicality of the paint became part of that kind of that kind of context and storytelling, and that really strongly affected me, and it's essentially become the way that I make my paintings today. I came out of a period of art school where I did my undergraduate at a place which people were kind of rewarded for doing, for lack of a better word, what I call sort of third generation, sort of somewhat figurative, abstract, expressionist kind of painterly stuff, right? And I did fine doing that, and like, you know, we all like to be rewarded, and the prof liked to work, and so
yeah.
and
Well,
then
that was big in the 80s too, right?
exactly, yeah. And then I went on to graduate school, and I showed up making those paintings, and I got the crap beaten out of me for those paintings, because I totally different environment. I went from basically great profs I had at an undergraduate, but they were all at about retirement age,
Right.
and had bought in, you know, to the values that were tied to that kind of painting process.
Yeah.
And I went to a graduate school, which was like very laden in critical theory, and they seemed to hate everything to do with that legacy. And so, and I became one of these. I went from being rewarded for doing something to being like a pariah for doing it. And so I was trying to figure out how to navigate the heart and the mind at the same time, and try to integrate them. And it took me a long time to come up with something I felt comfortable with. I went through a number of years where I spent all my time deconstructing all my paintings. I would make them, and then I'd inevitably hate them and hate myself. And
now, before this series of paintings, now I do recall seeing they were kind of gray, weren't they? Were you working with gray? Yes, I remember seeing those. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a series called Views from the Trench, and there were 41 paintings of basically very sort of minimal horizon lines made out of lead, that were lead wrapped around plywood, so they look like books that were kind of hanging on the wall.
Okay.
So anyway, I started looking at you know, this whole issue of the death of painting, and I went to the period. And I was kind of curious about what people were writing at that time about this so-called death of painting, and I found that almost all the arguments seemed kind of like trite and thoroughly uninteresting and unimaginative to me. And so it was suggested to me. I think I was reading a novelist who at the time who talked about the idea of generating ideas not from novels, but from life experiences or other kinds of artistic processes. So I started thinking about that. I thought about the other part of the equation is that I grew up in Scarberia in Scarborough, and but I grew up in like the new part of Scarborough, which was like, you know, this great social experiment of Scarborough, Ontario in the 1960s and 70s, right after the centenary. You know, there's all these new housing projects and a lot of like new schools and hospitals, and they had all those kind of super graphics on them, and I look back to that period and all that stuff, and I said, okay, what is it that I can glean out of this? And I started looking at popular music. I started becoming really interested in the dynamics, not so much the music itself, but what people were saying about that period in popular music. And I thought maybe there's a metaphor in there that could be a working metaphor for me. And so I started looking at music criticism, and in particular, criticism in the late 70s, which was centered around the whole dynamic between punk and disco. And and so you will definitely remember.
You're either in one camp or another, or like
we put up our driver's license to prove that among music critics, punk music was wildly celebrated, and it was celebrated in part because it was an attack on the kind of established commercial kind of plasticity and overproduction that occurred in a lot of pop music and rock. And
but it was highlighted in disco, right? That became like the pariah, the glitzy, superficial party music or whatever.
Exactly. And what was celebrated in punk was notions of authenticity and subjectivity and a certain de-skilling that went with it that was supposed to make it a more democratic and socially maneuverable for people, and it also kind of espoused these certain kinds of lyrics that were more expressive and expressionist in terms of their making, and that was in contradistinction to disco, which was going on at the same time, and that was which was viewed as dance music. It was overproduced. It was
kind of decadent and pleasure based.
Exactly, and inane in terms of most of the lyric.
Yeah.
There was vapidity to it in the way it was received in punk circles, right? It was vapid and empty and
exactly.
Well, and classic rock people, heavy metal people, like it's just like that's how I, right? I can remember that. I was in high school when disco was, and it was like that was anathema, right? Right?
Right.
I listened to whatever heavy rock. Like this is like.
Yeah, sure. I can. What fascinated me about this though was not so much like the dynamics, but how the truth historically about what happened to those movements kind of commingled, and that was that punk, which was viewed as more authentic and subjective, was also the easiest to co-opt and reify. And so it became almost like a kind of the ultimate in ironic posturing, that it's instead of being it's more like nudge nudge wink wink, I'm like that kind of thing. Every as we know, right, every high school kid who could buy a guitar and have a punk band within like days, right?
And you could play one string, right? Or you had the guys like Mike Watt who, there was another guy who played like 2 strings on the bass, right? That's it.
That's right. And so with the irony, of course, and it actually kind of paralleled what happened to neo-expressionism, the period, right? That it was like it was co-opting a language from a different kind of time period and pretending that it was somehow authentic, and so and at the same time, what was interesting about disco is, despite all the loathing that happened in the critical community to it, historically it became the only true political music of the 1970s for an urban, gay, and Black experience. And so, so there's this inversion of expectation, right? And that the seemingly inane, apolitical dance music became actually a kind of politics. And the subjective expressionist kind of punk movement became a kind of reified joke of itself. And
one of the things I'd like to ask is when you're you feel stuck, who do you look at, or what do you look at?
Yeah, good question. I had a professor in my undergraduate time who always said that as painters, he said, you only really like 5 artists and in your life. You just keep revisiting them at different times and seeing different things in them. And it's funny because it's not true, but there are parts of it that are actually pretty true. And I continue to look. I've tried to, as best as I can, to look outside of where I might think I should normally be looking, and for sources or inspiration. But I have to tell you, like I posted some stuff on Instagram recently, which was based upon, I did an essay for Border Crossings on the Unfinished exhibition that was at the Met.
Oh, yes, yeah, those are great.
Yeah, and I continually go back to some of the images that I saw there, and I've always been really intrigued by late Turner's. These ones are found in his studio after he died, and they're not sure if they're done or not done, and which I think is kind of hilarious. And the experts still debating whether or not these are finished paintings, and I just love that is part of the content of the piece now. It's like this kind of great potential unfinishedness to the, and I like that as a kind of dynamic in which somebody comes to the work. And then I also like the kind of the obscuring that happens in some artists' work where they're trying to erase things that they've done. But bottom line is, like, I still look at Turner. I look at even artists that I've never really quite understood. I'm going back to, like Howard Hodgkins, which is a good example.
Yeah.
And
but the canceling out kind of thing, and you work
and
with
also
such a tight space, like small space.
And also the fact is that he will, if you look at a lot of his work, it's the dating of the pieces can be over a course of 7 years, where something is worked on, it's put down, it could be left for years, collect dust, and worked on again. And that was kind of inspiring to me.
Do you go to the studio every day?
Pretty much, yes. Yeah, it's like a practice for me, or a discipline. And there's a lot of days I don't like. That's one of the reasons why I think with my work is that there's works in various stages of finish, and the minute that I finish one, I'm gessoing another one, because there can be a conversation back and forth between the works, but also that always something for me to be doing all the time. And if I'm really stuck and I don't know how to finish a couple pieces, I know how to begin at least a few pieces. So it's like, I'm really fortunate right now that I've got a studio space where I can work on multiple paintings at one time, and I think it's really changed my practice because I can kind of see through some ideas at different points in times in the painting's sort of generation. And when I get stuck on one thing, I've got something else I can do. And given the kind of layering up process that I use, I could do something to a painting one day, then I have to sit around and basically stare at my navel for about a day before I could do anything else to it. So it's nice to have, multiple pieces around. So I'm really fortunate that way. But at different times in my life, I've had studios that were small and that I essentially could only work on one piece at a time. And I think one of the problems I had was I tended to be a person of action more than thinking at certain points. And I think the problem with the smaller studio was I tended to ruminate on single works way too long.
Or you may overdo it, right? It's just like, just because you want something to do.
That's right, exactly. Just like keep messing with it over and over. Right? So yeah.
Even though it's probably perfect, right?
It's so interesting.
Yeah, because it needs a little touch here, right? And then, oh my God, what did I just do? Right? Yeah. That's true.
Mark,
it's so interesting because some people can only work on one piece at a time, because they just feel like they have to get it done. They have to reach completion before they can move on to the next piece. Other people, like yourself and actually myself, we're simpatico that way. I have to have multiple things going on at the same time. Otherwise, I don't know, just one piece alone just feels like it's just too absorbing. I need to spread it out. But do you find, because I do find this with my own work, in spreading it out, does it sometimes become a hindrance toward finishing a project or finishing a collection of works? Does that ever happen?
Absolutely. Yeah. And because what will happen is that you think you will finish the piece, but you're kind of unsure, so you leave it up for a little longer. Like, I have this relationship with the paintings where if I don't want to talk to it for a while, I'll turn it back to me or something like that, and then maybe drag it out. But when you think something's done, but you're not sure, and then all of a sudden a painting that's maybe a month behind it, something really interesting happens, you say, damn, now I think I should use that on this one, right? And and so you never finish these things. So I have to, at a certain point in time, I literally have to say enough, and I have to turn the back, to the wall, and
You're on your own now.
exactly.
Turn it away from
Go,
the
my
camera.
son.
Yeah.
I wonder if you ever, because you have all these different paintings, you get going with, say, blue dots. It's like, oh shit, blue dots on everything. Like you just sort of.
Oh, absolutely. It's sort of like, like if you're in the kitchen and you've got, there was a sale on at the grocery store of like certain kinds of tomatoes, like everything's got tomatoes in it for a while, right? And
Exactly, right. Yeah, for sure. Pattern.
Yeah. What I realized I was doing in my paintings was that I was essentially taking, I was kind of punking my disco and discoing my punk. I was taking those kind of sort of cliche-ridden expressionistic gestures and I was ornamenting them. And at the same time, I was taking those kind of super graphic, super plastic sort of pleasure moments, and I was painting them as fugly as I possibly could. And so the combination of those two things, with this kind of mashup, that to my mind spoke about an opportunity for abstraction to both kind of coalesce in a kind of re-spinning of that kind of an historical moment, and they looked new to me. They looked different, and which suggested that I was hopefully beginning a larger dialogue with painting as a language, which is very important to me. Right. I've always see these paintings as hopefully nodding to different conventions or codes about production, and so that's where these things came from. And the first of those were really right around the time of my Groove-Fucker series, that is around 2009, and where they really became kind of full blown as that. So I think the other thing that's important is I was also looking,
and that's what makes him so dynamic. Okay.
I was also looking at
Sorry, did I?
Oh, sorry. These experiences that I have had in my life. I was looking for a way, because historically a lot of abstraction is about looking in to a painting, and I wanted to kind of have the paintings go this way as opposed to this way, and so that you're scattered and your eyes are constantly moving, trying to generate meaning from the work. And the best analogy I had for that was like a personal experience I had back in grade school, and that was the first time I saw color blindness tests. And there's like all those dots, and they've got like the numbers in them, and
yes, of course,
absolutely mesmerized by them. But some of them I couldn't see anything. And actually, the nurse kept looking. They don't even test kids for color blindness anymore.
I don't think so. Yeah.
That they I was mesmerized, but what most interested me was the fact that this kind of idea of meaning kind of came in and I lost it. Came in and lost it. So I started ornamenting my marks a la a color blindness test, so that the marks had this kind of jitteriness to them all the time.
You're playing with like the high contrast, like they show up and then you don't see them, kind of.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Now I know over the years you've also been a writer and a teacher, and I know Marc's got so just would like to address that, but I think Marc's got. You have a question, Marc?
Well, yeah, I wanted to just follow up on what you were describing with the not just with Groove Fucker, but the shifting in the stylistic shifts that you've undergone over time. I know more recently you've mentioned on your website that you in your last series from 2020 you had added some atmospheric and depth elements to the painting style. And this just creates very dynamic work, I want to say. I mean, there's a vibrant in a
You're
to your work.
you're cutting out
because of the just create such a vibrancy.
Yeah,
Let's
when
see.
there's the depth,
Sorry,
right?
can you hear me now?
Yeah, and then there's the depth
Right.
with the.
All right. What I'd like to ask, right? What I'm curious about with artists whose work truly evolves like yours does, what is your relationship? How does it affect your relationship to past works when you reach a new stage in your development? I can say for my own self, in my own example, right now I underwent a shift in styles about around Christmas time, which I'm still working through. But when I look back at stuff I just did last summer, I go, oh no, I can't do that again. I need to work on this style. How does it affect your, when you change like that, how does it affect your relationship to your older work?
It makes it has a huge effect. And so I dealt with it in a couple of ways. Earlier in my career, the way that I would deal with it is getting all my paintings the hell out of the studio as fast as I could. So, and I was lucky that I had a dealer that had lots of storage. So they would just go and then they would disappear off the face of the earth. And then, of course, when the gallery, Marianne Katzman, when she closed down a couple of years ago, I had all these paintings I hadn't seen in years come back to my studio, like these orphans, like limping in. And of course,
are you sure you're mine?
Exactly. You don't look like mine.
Yeah.
And of course, some of them I was like, oh my God, what was I thinking about? But one of the ways, interestingly, that I've kind of made peace with some of those paintings has been starting around the same time I did Groove Fucker. I have a parallel body of work which I call remixes, and what I do is I actually will occasionally pull out an old painting that's sitting there collecting dust, and I will we'll have the kind of markings and attitude of a different time in my life, and I will go back and I will work on it, but I will start applying some of the kind of tropes and ideas that I have right now. And so these things become very encrusted, and they also become kind of almost like sketch pads for me to think about new ideas, and inevitably something will happen that I can take and bring back to the new work. But so when I do the remixes, I usually ruin one out of every two that I do. But quite honestly, the fact of the matter is that some of these paintings, nobody loved them anyway. So you have to do resuscitation, and if you can't, if not, you have to. It goes into what I call the green gallery.
No regret.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No regrets.
You probably have photos of it, and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I wonder. Just as you were talking, I was thinking about. I know I have this experience that if I rework, go back to a piece or even get it out, there are memories embedded in that process because when I was doing this color and this kind of shape, I was in this situation, living in this certain house and had this certain relationship. Do you find that those, especially now that you've got these older pieces that came back to you, like you're working on them and it's like, they just sort of, I don't know, trigger is the right word, but they ignite memories from the past, or just wonder if you have that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a bad analogy, but they're almost like finding a bunch of photographs in an envelope.
Okay.
And you're trying to purge, and back in the days where you just didn't do it on your phone, and they oh, that's a great photograph. That's a great picture of me and my parents, like that. Oh, that's a keeper. Other side, oh, that's not such a good photograph, and you throw it over here and say, oh, whatever, like that. And that's kind of what has happened in the studio. I've got paintings I will never touch that are meaningful and just and
they're complete.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
They still feel complete and good to me. And then there are other ones that were, quite frankly, probably dogs at the time, you know, like and they come back to me screaming, "I'm a dog," you know. But
Groom me.
but it's interesting because then you are inevitably, just like these kind of um, with these remixes, it's still the same project in a way, in that I'm still trying to figure out how to collide tropes, conventions,
Yeah.
and to create a kind of dynamic between them. And so now I'm doing it with myself, and as opposed to using art historical tropes. I'm now using stuff from my own life.
It's kind of like found art in your own studio.
Exactly. Exactly.
I wonder if we could shift to talking a bit about, so over the years you've been a teacher and a writer,
Mhm.
and I wonder how that just sort of impacts your art making and just maybe even your life, like attitudes. And I just quickly want to say, like, when I went through a period where I was writing a lot of reviews 20 years ago or so, and if I went to a gallery and I was just going as myself or an artist, I'd be like, I hate that. That's shit. I don't like. But as a writer, I'd go and I'd be like, oh, what's the meaning of this? What's this artist trying to convey, whether I liked it or not? And I could just talk about how, like, it made it clear to me that attitude and how you approach things changes how you see things.
The best thing that ever happened to me was to begin writing, honestly. And I don't think it, I'm not sure if it came naturally to me, but I just found I was way too curious, and that my own art couldn't hold all my curiosity for the art world. And there were things I didn't understand or things I felt strongly about. And I found that it was a good venue for me to think. I used my painting to think, and then I wanted another venue to think through, and that really helped me a lot. And I've been extremely lucky that way. That it's also changed my relationship with a lot of my peers and friends. That the ability to write on people I care about and work I care about. I've been pretty lucky in that, like, for the last, I don't know, 10 plus years, I really just do essay writing now. I don't usually write reviews anymore, and that way I can kind of pick the topics I want to discuss, and that's been kind of nice. And I think the combination of my practice as a painter, my work as a writer, and then my teaching, which is a kind of a third prong of that,
Sure, yeah.
Keeps me thoroughly exhausted.
Exhausted, and like it's like, as an artist or writer or anything, you could just sort of sit in your room and do your own thing, and it just sort of feeds on itself. But both writing and teaching, you are kind of exposed to ideas. Like,
Yeah.
these young people are coming up, and they, either they're revisiting things that you've sort of like, right? Like, there's this whole trend, everybody's revisiting the early 20th century with, like, Paul Klee and that whole kind of. It's just like, I thought that was dead. Like, I thought we processed that, but some younger painters are like revisiting that, and it's kind of exciting because they're opening a new door onto things that we thought was dead or exhausted.
Do your students see your work?
Pardon me?
John, do your students see your work? Do they dig?
Yes.
Do your students dig your work?
Oh, I have no idea if they like it.
Cool.
I'm sure like anyone, some do and some don't, right? What can you say?
They it's I think I remember that it was really special to me, though, when I was an art student, to be able to see my professors work in the galleries, to know that they
exactly
walk and talking the talk, and it wasn't just this kind of like
academic.
thing.
Yeah.
So,
but they respond well to your work in a sort of in a understanding kind of way.
I think they get it. I think the people that get to know me see the work as very John-like. So once this thing's over, come visit, and you can come to the brewery and get to walk around, which is very cool. And
I would love to do that. And I love that area.
Absolutely.
It's been a while since I used to live in Kitchener, so It's been a while since I've been. That was like 35 years ago, so it's been a while. I'm sure things have changed, and I would love to see. Yeah. All right. Well, it's in the calendar for whenever it happens.
Right. Absolutely. Well, it's an open invitation, and I'd love to have both of you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, and it's been fabulous chatting with you.
Yeah.
All right, guys, enjoy your Saturday. It's gorgeous out.
Stay safe, and
Thank you.
all right,
Thank
man.
you. Cheers.
Okay.